folks. Thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, I have Caitlin from Hood River / Clear Creek / McCarthy's / everything else joining me. She and I have developed a little bit of a communication back and forth over the last month or two, maybe three at this point. And we're going to have a really fun conversation. And I'm going to bet money that it's going to run long. We're going to have to do this again because she's just an interesting person to talk to. All right. So this morning or afternoon or whenever anyone happens to be consuming this, I have Caitlin from Clear Creek, Hood River, McCarthy's, a whole host of things joining me. And most recently, you've been named the Master Distiller of Hood River.
Correct.
How does that feel?
I don't know if it's really sunk in yet. I'm not sure. Maybe someday I'll have this lightning rod moment where it feels real. But for the time being, it doesn't really feel real. It's one of those things that you work really hard to get up to, but once you get there, it's not like there was a really big change from what I was doing the day before to what I was doing the day after. The most interesting thing is the public perception of my value has changed the most, and that's been a little shocking. So it's been kind of fun, but people that would maybe look over me or not want to talk to me for various reasons, once they find out that I'm a master distiller, they're like, oh, well, she might know something cool. But as far as like personally, like I'll put it this way. I greatly look forward to the day that I'm like sipping a cup of coffee or who knows what I'll be doing, and then all of a sudden it'll drape across my shoulders like some robe or whatever, and I'll actually feel like a master distiller. But it's an incredible honor, absolutely. Not only to have a title that so few people in this industry around the world have, but also mostly the recognition from my company for all the hard work and time that I've spent here. Actually, I turned 14 this month, so 14 years of a lot of hard work, a lot of education and stuff. So to have that recognized by the company you work for, that's a huge honor, and I'm definitely grateful for it.
And I think the thing that maybe should probably won't, because there's a degree of humility that just inherently lives inside of you. But the thing that maybe should kind of push you into accepting the role sooner is that the minute that it hits any type of news waves, at least from what I saw, it was met with tons of people all across the industry saying, yeah, this checks out, about time, or exactly right, instead of who is this, right? There was a whole lot of, sure. No, yes, this, and there were even a few people that are like, wait, wasn't she already? Like there was some degree of surprise from some people.
The resounding support from my peers, and certainly, so many people that I wouldn't even dare to call peers because I hold them in such high regard to have their support as well. Like that was a wild ride when I was finally allowed to make the posts on Instagram and share things on LinkedIn and stuff. So absolutely.
So, and you touched on this a little bit. You see, you couldn't necessarily tell a difference between before and after. I guess for you, the Master Distiller title doesn't have any, formal regulations, any formal requirements by it, and everybody slightly does it differently. But for you, if you were writing the description of Master Distiller for your successor, what would that be? Like, how would that be different than what you were doing before?
The difference, between head distiller and master distiller. Master distiller is definitely out in the field more. In a lot of ways, in almost every way, I'm not on the production floor anymore. Right. That's been the biggest change in the last year. Really, I guess it's so hard. Time flies so fast. I guess really it's been the last 4 or 5 months, I'm hardly out on the production floor anymore. It's one of those things where the higher up you go, the less time you actually doing the thing, and you spend more time talking about the thing. So that's been the the biggest change in the last 6 months, if not the entire year. Is I come in the morning and sometimes I help load the stills. Most of the time I don't. I know that my predecessor, Joseph O'Sullivan, really appreciated every once in a while he'd just fly out into the distillery and he needed to be a part of whatever was physically happening that day. Maybe that will be an urge that I'll have once I'm in the position for as long as he was. But right now, I've been kind of enjoying the opportunity to slide into my morning a little bit easier instead of racking up my first 1,500 steps within the first 40 minutes of the day. So for right now, it feels like an absolute treat. I have an amazing team, Garrett Trotter and Everett Rubin. They're the reason that I get to do things like talking to you on a Tuesday afternoon. And they're the reasons that I get to go and do a lot of the travel and not only the consumer education, but also the on-prem education, going and talking to our distributor partners, doing speaking engagements. All of that is possible because these two wonderful young men that actually do the thing. They actually are making the stuff. They're crushing the fruit. They're distilling the brandy. They're making, they're distilling the whiskey and taking care of the home front so that I have the opportunity to do those things away from home. So that's the big difference. But also the difference between head distiller and master distiller, it's largely a time scale thing. And I think it's something that probably is shared, maybe not exclusively with all of the interpretations of this title, but definitely it's a thread that I kind of see throughout the industry where the time scale of what you're working with is different, right? So when you're a distiller, you're working on what does that day, sort of that week and kind of that month look like? And how can you make sure that you're pulling in the same direction that the rest of your team is going to meet those goals? When you're the head distiller, you're definitely considering the day and the week, but you're looking more at the month and the year and maybe the next 2 years, right? You understand where we need to be in the next 18 months. What are the choices that you can do now? What are the emails that you can send now? What are the plans that you can put in place so that we're meeting our goals 18 months out? And then master distiller is just a continued extension of that. Maybe less bothered by the time you get there on what the day-to-day, hour by hour, minute by minute is, but more focused on, okay, well, this is where we want to see ourselves in 2 to 5 years, or depending on the scale of your company, maybe that master distiller is looking out the 5 to 20 years, and what those long-term goals are, not only for a singular brand or a singular distillery, but maybe the entirety of a company, or really even where they see an entire category or the spirits industry itself going. So it's really the amount of time or the time scale that you're focusing on and the decisions that you can make to get yourself there along the way. That's the broader difference between those roles. But when you're a small company, the change from head distiller to master distiller is, there's 3 of us that work here. So if either one of Everett or Garrett calls in sick, then I'm not a master distiller. I'm a distiller, right? My whatever emails, whatever meetings, whatever long-term planning projects I'm working with, those don't matter. They're physical things that need to be done that day, and it's nice to have that physical work break. But like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and the fact that it's been 6 months maybe since I've climbed into a tank to clean it, and that I missed out on the last 2 times that the stills were cleaned, after 14 years, nearly 14 years of that. I'm enjoying a little bit of a break from that those couple of
and it's good to hear. It's good to hear exactly that, because this is it's every industry. It doesn't matter whether it's distilling or not. And in my work, the more you climb up, the less work you're actually doing, and the more long range planning or road mapping or ideation. You're starting to get into like soothsaying,
Yep.
and instead of being an alchemist, now you're trying to predict the future, right?
Oh yeah. No, you become you stare into the crystal ball and try not to lose your mind. That's
Yeah, and you can see maybe 3 or 4 potential different futures that exist, and what you should do to achieve all 3 or 4 of them are all incredibly very, very different, and
yeah,
you sort of.
absolutely.
So I
It's just going to
fully
be really
understand that,
telling the
like.
fact that I may or may not have watched the Dune 2 like maybe 3 times in the last 10 days, or I'm like, yeah, it's like Paul, but before he drinks the blue worm juice. Spoiler. Maybe I
I
feel like
haven't yet.
everybody that really wanted to
Well,
see it
so
would probably
I
see it
watched
by
the old
now.
Dunes, and I've read at least the first novel. I didn't read the second novel, but I have been putting off the second movie until I have the time to
Oh
devote to sit down
no.
and watch it. And
Okay,
you're not.
but
I
you've
mean,
read the book, so you know what's going to happen. Okay,
right?
that's fair.
Like I know what's going to happen. We're really looking for the artistry of what's being made. That's what it's
Oh
really,
yeah.
really about. And
No,
honestly, I
it's
could know the story end to end and still want to
mhm,
watch it. Because
mhm.
it is fantastic. So,
Well, I will
but for
admit
anyone
that
else,
I am
hey,
absolutely a filthy casual when it comes to Dune. I remember being traumatized as a youth by the 1980s version. My dad liked it, and it would be on TV. We never had
Mhm,
the VHS or anything like that, but if it was on like regular TV, he'd want to put it on, and like
mhm.
the Duke Harkonnen, like blah, in that 80s version of it. Absolutely traumatized. But the new movies, yeah, are amazing, stunning.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. But I can also fully understand, kind of Joe's sentiment, and what will probably eventually be years. Some days after looking into the crystal ball for so long, all you want to do is go be successful at a thing, and the thing you can go be successful at. It's
Mhm.
turning the handle, it's cleaning the still, it's doing whatever. I'll find myself occasionally, kind of going back to the other end of the building and saying, "Hey, I'll take care of this one thing," just because I know that I can start it and finish it in the next 20 minutes. It'll be done. It'll be done right. And I can check a box and feel, some degree of, hey, I did a good job today. Right. Because
Yep.
when you are looking at the crystal ball, you don't know if you're successful for a year.
Mhm.
You're guessing and measuring along the way. Um,
Well, and when
this,
you're and you never know what curveballs. I mean, good Lord, I
mhm,
can't imagine what people were going through, in 2019. Everybody was making all these 2019 plans and like
right.
seeing, okay, well, this is what the industry is doing, and beer and wine are losing share, spirits is seeing the premiumization trend, bourbon is still really hot, we're seeing those bottle prices increase, all those things, right? And some of the big players making moves and acquisitions and what the threshold of
Hmm.
case sales were for those acquisitions, and then global pandemic, and all of the various problems that kind of have surfaced after that, between supply chain issues and major shipping
Right.
canals being blocked, that have completely changed, everything, all the way down to our drinking culture. And so, like, to have been somebody that was in charge of crystal ball gazing, between
Hmm.
2015 and 2019, thinking that they had this grand plan and things were building into this like momentous crescendo of planning and execution, and then to have literally all of it wrecked and an entire global culture shift and change. Woof. So, like, definitely on the like I'm starting that process on the other side of the pandemic. And as
Hmm.
as a millennial, you get we millennials kind of get used to the entire world changing on a dime. We've been through a lot of things in the last 25 years, and it's just kind of like, yeah, okay, that's a thing.
It's
That's a
it's
thing.
not even the last 25 years, because millennials expands. Like, I'm the last year of Gen X, very, very last year, 1980. Some thresholds even put me on the what is it,
You're a
the
cuspy.
geriatric millennial, right? So
Sure,
we're
sure, sure. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
An elder
elder,
millennial, sir. Be
whatever.
kind to
Geriatric's the
yourself.
term that everybody's thinking when you say elder. Like, we know, we're aware, but as a kid who was born in 1980,
Sure.
you start with something like Ronald Reagan's attempted assassination, and then the
Hmm.
Challenger explosion. And then you just kind of walk
Hmm.
your way into a series
Hmm.
of just world events. We
Hmm.
watched a war live on TV at one point.
Yep.
We just
Yep.
sort of sat around and watched these things.
Been through three major economic upheavals and recessions, or whatever you want to call
I
them.
don't know how many times I've watched riots live on TV.
Yeah.
That's a new thing for us. It's all
Mhm.
sort of new, and I think the brands that did the best post pandemic, well, during the pandemic, were the people that had a good supply of caffeine in somebody with a really, really controllable ADHD, right? Because
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
about how
No,
quickly you could
I will,
react.
as a distillery that's still standing, I will 100%, 10 out of 10 confirm that that is absolutely the case.
It's like one person who's
A
like, "Hey, I got this
well-regulated
crazy ass
militia
idea,"
of
and somebody's like,
ADHD
"Let's go
kids.
with it," you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. Especially like going into the pandemic, like Joseph and I made 22,000 gallons of hand sanitizer in the month
Mhm.
of April of 2020. And the first 500-gallon batch that we found ourselves standing over, we just like, we weren't sure if we were going to have jobs. We weren't sure,
Mhm.
if we were going to die or whatever. We're like, and then, whatever, like we'd never been through a pandemic before. And now we're making
Right.
hand sanitizer. Like, and we just kind of stopped and looked at each other and then just had this, like, all the stress and uncertainty. We completely had like a giggle meltdown. Just like, what are we doing with our lives? We're making 500 gallons of hand sanitizer. Like, okay, yeah, no, we just completely, like, we were on ladders, we got off ladders because we were laughing so hard at just like the
Mhm.
absurdity and the strangeness of the situation that we found ourselves in. So yeah, no, that's what you got
You
to do. You got to be ready for that curveball, and you have to be able to adjust to it.
they say, laughter and crying sound almost exactly the same to a person who can't see someone's face. So
Yeah.
I get that, and it says something about the necessity for distillation in any facet, right? So
Mhm.
whether it's for the consumption of beverages that we all sort of enjoy, or if it's for creating um, hand sanitizer or any number of other things, it's sort of a weird place to be, right? So,
It's actually kind of a really fun, if you don't mind my taking you on a little bit of an
yeah, go for it.
adventure outside of an actual interview question. But it's kind of a fun fact about Hood River Distillers that not a lot of people, well, most people don't know a whole lot about Hood River Distillers because throughout their history as a company, the brand of Hood River Distillers and the actual company has always been kind of like a ghost behind all of the
Mhm.
brands that they've created. I mean, HRD turns 90 this year. 90. They
Mhm.
were founded like months after prohibition was lifted, and yet like there are people in Oregon that don't know that they exist. But to your point, as far as there's always a place for distilling. They were founded in 1934, making essentially the same thing that Clear Creek was founded making in '85 by Stephen McCarthy, which is fruit brandies from the bounty of the Pacific Northwest, right?
Mhm.
And then World War II happens, and any producer of alcohol in the United States was asked pretty pleased by the United States government, hey, could you be making industrial alcohol instead
Mhm.
for manufacturing purposes? And so Hood River Distillers was like, yep, you got it. And so they shifted gears in the early 40s and started making industrial alcohol until the war was over. So like, absolutely, it's not it doesn't necessarily have to be for fancy pear brandy or beautiful American single malt or even just your bog standard bottom shelf vodka. Distilling is definitely something that is necessary for a lot of different reasons.
And there's probably a book in there, and I really hope that there's someone that is nerdy enough that listens to this, like, you know what, I should write that book, like the
Me too.
value of distilling in North America and how it pivots in times of crisis,
Mhm.
whether it be
Mhm.
war, whether it be pandemic, whatever, right? Because we've got at least a handful of instances where distilling had to sort of change its trajectory based off
And
of the events of the
quickly, I
world,
mean, even
right?
with prohibition, like there are several states that went through a couple of prohibitions. I think Oregon was
Mhm.
a fairly early adopter, and then the national prohibition was Oregon's second prohibition. So,
Mhm.
like, there are a handful of companies that managed to survive prohibition. Like if you want to talk about the history, even the relatively short history, from like 1740 on of American distilling, right? Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of changes really fast. You talk about some of our European counterparts, like cognac, there's some of those old cognac houses that have, demijohns of brandy that are a couple hundred years old. And,
Yeah.
those families have been making grape brandy and growing grapes and making grape brandy for tens of generations. And then, nothing really changes and everything's pretty steady. And then it really is the Wild West when you talk about the
Mhm.
history of American distilling in comparison.
I think Europe in general is just a great litmus test of us thinking things are old, right? Because there are likely these demijohns of Armagnac that are older than this country
Yeah, yeah.
in that country, right? Like they've been
Mhm,
aging longer than we've
mhm.
been in existence. Because you get this myopic worldview here in the Western culture, like, oh, we're great, but we've only been around like small amount on
Such
the
a
grander
small
timeline.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So we've definitely wandered, and I'm all about that. But I did want to ask a couple questions specifically.
Mhm,
How do you're the master distiller now for Hood River, which oversees a handful, well, not a handful, a large handful, maybe three handfuls of brands,
mhm,
in its creation of how do you get to this job? Because it's not super common, or at least not super common for your age
mhm,
group, right?
mhm,
For younger age groups, there are a lot more opportunities for fermentation, distillation, education in the world,
mhm.
but there weren't a ton in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. So how do you
Well, yeah,
get
because
to?
there wasn't the jobs. Like, when
Mhm.
well, I'll start in the middle and then circle around to the front and get to the end. That's pretty traditional with a Bartlemay story.
Yeah.
There wasn't the opportunity for jobs. Like, to put in an even broader or paint with an even broader stroke. Let's talk about in 1984, there was only 50 breweries.
Mhm.
Like, let's like when you talk about the landscape of the American drinking culture right now, and you're talking about the amazing success of RTDs, the craft spirits movement. Let's dial it all the way back to 1984. There's a handful of wineries that have made big waves across California, and then starting to in Oregon. A lot of the bigger ones, I believe, started in the early 70s in Oregon. So like wine is starting to grow on the small scale craft side in the US. But in 1984, there was 50 breweries. That includes AB. That's not just craft breweries, it's breweries. So let's fast forward to when I graduated from Oregon State in 2010. I used the broadest sense of the definition of geographical definition of the Pacific Northwest, and I applied. Well, I didn't apply. I sent a resume and a cover letter, just cold, to every distillery in that very broad geographical definition of what I consider to be the Pacific Northwest that I wanted to work in, which included Northern California and Montana, which
Mhm.
most people from the area are loath to even admit Idaho into their definition of the Pacific Northwest.
I was going to say you jumped a
I was
whole
being so
state that people
generous.
wouldn't include to begin with to get to another
Yeah.
state. That's impressive.
So, and that number was 12. There was
Mhm.
12, which included Hood River Distillers at the time. And Hood River Distillers, until the purchase of Clear Creek Distillery in 2014, were a rectifier. They were buying bulk spirits and creating all of these different brands and doing an amazing job at it. Pendleton whiskey, huge success. They sold that to Proximo in 2017. So they're really great at what they do. But that was 12. And now I just actually totted it up fairly recently. That same geographical region is 200. It's over 200
Mhm.
distilleries in that same region. So for there was just not opportunity. There was so many different distilleries and companies of which to be master of now in comparison to what there was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so too the access to the wealth of information. When when I originally got interested in it, there wasn't even that much information online. There weren't a bunch of really cool books. There weren't Discord groups that full of people that were interested in learning more about whiskey. They weren't podcasts about whiskey.
Mhm.
And even the consumers have changed the kind of information that is totally workaday at this point in time because of the amount of transparency that a general consumer expects now from any kind of whiskey brand, right? If I went on to a Jim Beam website in 2010, I probably wouldn't be able to get a mash bill for anything that they made. I wouldn't be able to get a definition for. I mean, if you go on Angel's Envy right now, they have helpful definitions for bourbon flock,
Mhm.
right? Like they have a page dedicated to bourbon flock. By the way, if anybody from Angel's Envy is listening, thank you so much because I send people there all the time when they're asking what bourbon flock is. I'm
Every
like,
so
you know
often they
what?
get a spike on that
If you
page and
don't
they're like,
believe
"Where the hell is
me,
this coming from?"
yeah, yeah. If you don't believe me, like why don't you look at the website of this very well-respected brand and learn a little bit about what it is, and learn that I am also not lying to your face. It's totally a thing. It's not harmful. It's fine. So none of that kind of information was available even 14 years ago, right? And so the programs that you have available to you, you know, they're and the awareness of those programs. I mean, when I graduated from Oregon State in 2010, they had just been given an alembic still, and now they have a master's program in distilling. So like just on that scale, you know, there's more people interested in it. There's more jobs for those people, and there's more access to the information to be able to grow within the industry and grow quickly. Because really, when I graduated from college, the only opportunity I had to learn really was to get a job at a distillery, and so that's what I did. So that's the middle portion. I think I've gone over it on several podcasts, so I'm going to make it really short, unless you want to ask me like really fun farm kid stories. But I grew up on a farm in Eastern Oregon, working for my dad by the time I was 7, and he started a winery because dads ferment things in basements. And when dads ferment things in basements, they have their small children help squish things, because that's what small children are for, is going and getting beers out of the fridge and squishing things. So I thought fermentation was pretty cool from a very young age. And you know, talk about burgeoning changes in culture with the addition of Food Network and satellite TV in the middle of nowhere. And so thanks to Alton Brown and Good Eats, as well as who I've been to every one of his live shows. I am an absolute Alton Brown nerd. I even went to one of his book signings and gave him a pear in the bottle, because I am that much of a nerd. But the show was great. And then I was also watching Iron Chef, which my parents didn't understand why their, you know, weird farm kid was watching a Japanese competitive cooking show. I still think Iron Chef Japan is the best TV that's ever been made, and I wish they would bring it back. And so yeah, it was an easy choice to choose the food science department at Oregon State. And then once I decided I wanted to learn more about distilling, like I said, the only option really was to get a job at a distillery, and Clear Creek is the place that called back. So I've been through an awful lot with the company. I started, you know, like many of us do, on the packaging line, and then spent some more time on the stills, and weaseled my way into taking over the logistics side of things. So after, I think I started pulling like case goods orders and wrapping them up like within the first 6 months. Because I was like, I don't know, that's the thing that I can do. I can pull orders. And then by 18 months in, I had taken over as logistics coordinator. So then I was not only on the packaging line and doing distilling and all the other cleaning and stuff, but I was doing the domestic and some of the international case goods shipping for the company. And I always, whenever they were looking for volunteers for overtime, or they were always looking for volunteers to try something new or to do more, I would stick my hand up, because it was an opportunity to learn more. I don't know if I would necessarily give that same advice to somebody now, because that's a really great way to work way too hard for a really long time when you just keep on asking for more. But that's what's also gotten me here. So
it's a relatively common story, and it feels like a weird mixture of academia, and then you go from academia directly into trade school, right? Where you're doing an apprenticeship, and you start at at the bottom end of the apprenticeship and work your way to the top. And I thoroughly enjoy the touch point to Alton Brown, and I'll have to, you know, date myself a little bit in the fact that you were watching Alton Brown as a child, as I was watching him as an adult. So
Sure.
life's a little bit different that way. And I
Hey,
think
we're only 7 years apart. It's not as bad as you're making it out to be.
it's, you know, that's the difference between 14 and 21.
Sure. Uh-huh.
It can be pretty
Yeah, no,
good
that's fair.
enough.
That's fair.
But
I will say, you know, in regards to, you know, your apprenticeship, so my first day, and I'm not even sure if I've ever told this story recorded. I think I've only told a few people. Hilariously, my first 2 days at Clear Creek Distillery, I was like, all right, I've got this shiny new degree. I know things now. I've got a job at a distillery. Look at me ticking boxes. Here we go. Let's do some really cool distilling stuff. Let's do some science. I've got all the brains. My first 2 days, I was sorting sinking pibs from floating pibs. So pibs are our shorthand for pear in bottle. So we grow pears in bottles the entire year in the orchard, and then we take them off and they get cleaned twice with a very secretive proprietary cleaning method. It's totally not. And then they get pear brandy on the inside, and then after a while, they will sink. The pears actually, from filling to when they actually ship out, they make 2 trips up and down the bottle, which is some really cool science that if you want to ask me about, I'll tell you. But for the sake of the story, day one, they're like, hey, nice to have you. High five. Good job. So here's a pallet of boxes, and those boxes are bottles, unlabeled bottles of pibs. We need you to sort them sinkers to floaters because we only sell sinkers. So I was like, cool. I just spent all this money and all this time and heartache and effort getting this bright and shiny fermentation degree, and I'm doing something that I could have done when I was 8.
Right.
Or really like well less, although the boxes are pretty heavy. So the boxes weigh 44 pounds each. So like 8 probably would have been right about the right time for me to be moving about 250 44-pound boxes in a day.
I mean, you were a farm kid, so you were ready for that.
Yeah, but yeah, it was a little, I don't want to go so far as to say demoralizing. I think at the time I would have. But now that's you got to start somewhere. And I remember and I started in June, and by the end of July, I had a new responsibility, and that was I was in charge of watering the flowers in the front because we used to have a tasting room in the distillery. And I really internally chafed at that as well, until about 3 or 4 weeks into this new bright, shiny responsibility of keeping the plants alive in the front. And I was like, you know what? Who knows if I'm going to be in this industry for a really long time, but I'm going to guess that at some point in my life, in my career, I'm going to look back on a time where my only responsibility was spending 45 minutes watering the flowers every afternoon and be like, man, that was awesome. So like once I kind of had that kind of like as side pep talk with myself, essentially an internal pep talk with myself, I was like, you know what, today, this year, this season, our biggest responsibility is watering the flowers, and maybe that's okay because everybody's got to start somewhere. So I'm not sure if I'd have believed you that 14 years later I'd be master distiller and have done and learned so much along that way, but yeah, it's been a fun and interesting ride to get here.
You know, and I'm sure the degree helped, right, to get to this point, at least, you know, in that time frame. Uh, in college, I worked at Lowe's, and we had a gentleman that was in retirement, and his job was to water plants outside. And he was the happiest human being I've ever met in my life
Yep.
because he had already worked. He had been an executive within a train company and done a lot of logistics stuff. And he was like, he's obviously collecting his pension, right? So he's really just here for a little bit of health insurance and something to
Sure.
do to get him up and move. But, watering the plants was a pretty nice thing for him. But going backwards a little bit, it's a little bit fitting that Alton Brown is a person that kind of sticks with a person who ends up in a fermentation science degree path, right? Because a lot of his work was based explicitly on the science of food, right? And cooking, and at least for me, the creation of any spirit, whether it be aged or unaged, are very, very similar because you're taking these base ingredients, you're doing a little bit of magic to them, and out the other end you get something that may be greater than the individual pieces along the way. It's cooking, it's distilling, it's art in and of itself. Red, blue, and green are red, blue, and green until you make a painting out of them, right? Like that's sort of the way it exists. And I've liked Alton Brown for a while, especially, I don't know if you ever caught whenever he was on Twitter and he would take a picture of a Post-it note where he was replying to people on Twitter, and he was like absolutely, kind of tongue in cheek, thumbing his nose at the way Twitter's supposed to be used. He's not hitting reply. He's writing on a Post-it, stick it to the screen, take a picture of it.
Yep.
That may have been my favorite time of Twitter's existence ever, right? Like whenever that was happening. We're definitely way out there still. So I do want to come back and talk about I want to talk about the brands that you're working for and with, so we can give them their time that is necessary, right? Because you do work hard on these things. You are creating the planning for a lot of things. So I guess maybe what is what is your favorite product to plan and make
Oh,
for, or can you say that?
oh, you can't do that. Oh, you can't make me choose. Come on. I mean, we know most parents have a favorite kid, but they don't want to say that out loud.
Right, not especially not in a place where that child can eventually grow up and listen to it and be like, "Oh," you know? Now, luckily, your children can't, but, you know, your peers can, and they can be like, "Oh, she doesn't like
Yeah,
what XYZ."
yeah. Um, I have a least favorite, but I
Mhm,
don't honestly I honestly not sure I have I yeah. There is a scale. I think I could sort them all, but it would be hard to pick a singular favorite, right? I think
mhm,
it would be maybe a top 10. I don't know. So Hood River Distillers, we've got like over 30 brands, and over those 30 brands there's 300 SKUs, and
mhm,
within that organization Clear Creek is a singular brand, but Clear Creek is 19 liquids, right?
mhm,
So we make a lot of stuff. uh, and all of the R&D for the company largely happens up here with our team as well. And so I love the R&D process. I love trying to the operation and the work of finding that balance between flavors, a balance of a blend, where the tolerances are, like, hey, that's kind of a wonky smell and taste, but
mhm,
if we use it sparingly, it's below threshold. Cool. That's a really neat thing to learn about what you're working with. Just as it's really neat to be like, wow, this taste is really amazing and a lot of people like it. How do we figure out how to make more of that taste?
mhm.
Both sides of the coin are really valuable. But to pick a favorite thing from the products that we already made, like, I would say that we always talk a lot about the distiller's favorite brandy is the Blue Plum.
Mhm.
Although our newest distiller, Everett Rubin, I think he's still in love with the pear brandy over the Blue Plum brandy. This is his first time distilling the Blue Plum, so maybe he hasn't quite gotten on board yet. It makes a killer blended daiquiri, and I am a monster. I do like it blended. I'm fully willing to admit that makes me a monster. Um, and the PX McCarthy's is probably the best thing that we've ever made. But then I say that, and then this little, pull on my heartstrings, that 15-year-old apple brandy that we released. For unicorns, essentially, there was only
Mhm.
4 barrels of it. That was the cigar special for a really long time. And so now that it's gone, the PX is a cigar special. But there are so many things. There's so many things in this barrel room that are special that
Mhm.
don't even have a project yet. They don't have a package or a label for. Um, and kind of all those pieces together are my favorite thing.
Yeah, so you guys have a lot of innovation going on over there, and I guess maybe a different question that's similar. You know, there are certain flavors that just don't connect with people, right? Like with certain types of people. You know, I have the genetic marker for cilantro, right? Cilantro
Okay.
tastes like soap to
Mhm,
me, and it
mhm.
always has. And I can't get on board with absinthe. I can taste when I think it's good, but I don't like it, right?
Yeah,
I
aniseed
don't
is
like this flavor.
that's a very polarizing flavor for sure.
Does that worry you as a master distiller that you're gonna come across a spirit that you just absolutely don't like, and then you're also going to be in charge of creating and making that?
No. And the reason is you have to learn to be able to separate your own preferences and your own tastes from the project at hand.
Mhm,
I've worked on projects where it's definitely not my cup of tea. It's not something that I would be interested in exploring. It's not a shelf at the store that I would even glance over, let alone pick up a bottle. And
mhm,
yet have really enjoyed working on the project because I am willing to, you have to be able to separate all of that from what you're working on. You have to be open and willing to accept that other people have different tastes that are not your own and that those tastes are valid. I will absolutely not say that my taste is the best taste. And
mhm,
anybody that does that feels so highly about their sensory perceptions and honestly says that they are always correct and that they taste and smell exactly the way that everything should be tasted and smelled, and then their sensory is absolute, um, is full of it.
Yep.
Like humans experience so many different things, right?
Hmm.
We travel, we have families that come from all around the world. We live in all different kinds of climates. We live in all different kinds of houses. And your sense memory and your actual memory are so tightly combined that affects your preferences, that affects the things that you like or you don't like. Generally speaking, those of us in the Western world, we love things that are crunchy. And that's one of the things that a lot of Western people struggle when they move into more Asian cuisines, because in Asian cuisines, there's a lot of gumminess. There's a lot of the gummy texture in those cuisines. And we like crunchy things and don't do a whole lot of gummy things. And so there's a disconnect there. And neither of those things is right, and neither of those things is wrong. And so to say that, like, I don't care for some of the gummier things. Like, I
Hmm.
understand mochi, but I'm not like super stoked about it. I understand boba tea. It's not something that when I see there's a boba cart that I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. But
Right.
even though I've never traveled to India or to the UK where curries are well known, I absolutely love the Indian
Hmm.
spice palette. And there's an Indian food cart that has opened up, and I spend far too much money there. Um, but and that's the agglomeration of not only the genetics that make up my body and my sensory palette, but also all of the memories and the
Hmm.
experiences that this body and this brain has had over these 36 years that get me to where I am with my preferences. I think getting outside of those is a lot of fun, and also
Hmm.
playing within your team's preferences. That was so Garrett Trotter, our other distiller. He's been with us for just shy of 3 years, and it's really fortunate for us as a team that he really, really loves bitter flavors, and I tend to be very bitter sensitive. And so if we find something that neither of us is 100% happy about, then we know something, then we know we have something that's going to appeal to the greater audience. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to
Hmm.
find something that's going to appeal to the greater audience. It's super fun if it's something that also appeals to you, but it is not a requirement.
Right.
And realistically, it can be just as fun if it's not something that you like, because it gives you an increased and different perspective on how to solve a puzzle,
Hmm.
right? Because you're not trying to solve it the same way that everybody solved it, because you're approaching it from the entirely different direction. I don't like this, but I know what everybody that likes this wants it to be. So how do I connect those dots together? So yeah, if it's super bitter, then Garrett loves it, and I'll be like, this is really hard for me to get on board with. And if there's no bitter at all, and I'm not so extreme that I'm on board with no bitter at all, but if it doesn't
Hmm.
have a little bit of that bitterness, that balance in a flavor, he's like, I don't know if this is quite right. And so knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are on the individual palettes of your team, also super important in solving that problem.
And maybe Garrett just has like an old person's palate, right? Because I read an article that the well, I read an article that the older you get, the less susceptible you are to bitter flavors, and so you
Mm-hmm,
don't taste them nearly as much because
mm-hmm,
your
mm-hmm.
palate is starting to dull a little bit, and so those edges aren't there. So maybe he's just got an old person's palate. You just
Well, the other thing
get him with that.
too, you have to remember the super tasters that we're
Yep.
potentially dealing with, and those people tend to be very, very sensitive to bitter. And
Hmm.
as far as the like almost specific litmus test, where it's like literally a piece of paper with chemicals on it, that's the paper test to see if you are a super taster or not.
Hmm.
I test positive on that test. My dad got really interested in it, which is why I've
Hmm.
taken that test. I don't have the strips to like test Garrett, but I would not be his affinity towards bitter. I wouldn't be surprised if he tested negative, because he's
Hmm.
not as sensitive to it, so he likes it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely, and super tasters sort of throw things off, but even with them, right? So you're kind of going back to, whether a thing tastes good or not, or somebody who thinks they know 100%. Anybody can taste the same thing 3 times on 3 different days, and they may find some similarities, but there's gonna be some outliers because of what you ate, because of where you went, because of the laundry detergent, because of somebody pulled out in front of you and it changed your mental state. There are so many factors that go into it because taste is subjective. There are certain things that will be there anytime anybody does a whiskey tasting, like if you're tasting bourbon, you can just say vanilla or caramel. All right,
Sure.
you're going to be
Yeah.
fine. You can
Yeah.
say those two things, but when you start getting into the nuance, you may taste a thing today that you don't taste next week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because any number of reasons that go into play. So, um, even when a super taster is like, "Oh, it's 100%. This is the only thing that's in here." Okay,
Sure.
sure.
Today.
I
Yeah.
taste something different, and so that's
Uh-huh.
perfectly fine. There's not a wrong answer, I guess.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking to people about that are maybe early on in their careers, and they ask for advice and sensory advice as well. And it's like the best advice that I can give anybody is to be confident. Like if you
Mhm.
pick up a glass and you smell Reese's peanut butter cups dipped in a strawberry milkshake, who am I to tell you that that's not exactly what you're smelling and tasting? I don't
Right.
know. Like and really there's some tricks and tips that I've learned over 14 years, and a lot of that has to do with just learning the vocabulary. Like
Mhm.
I might have picked up something that it smells like a Massey Ferguson lawnmower going over the top of wild mustard, right? Because
Mhm.
that's the memory that I had, and that was what I was smelling. And so now I internalize that. Well, sometimes I internalize it. Sometimes it's fun to
Mhm.
say it anyways.
Yeah.
But you can internalize that and then break it down into the vocabulary of what you're smelling and tasting. So it's like, yeah, I'm getting
Mhm.
some fusel components. I'm also getting this really bright herbaceous note, some floral hits, and then you can dive deeper into that vocabulary to pull out those
Mhm.
specific things. But really, what my brain is actually feeding me first is, mowing the weeds outside the fence at the house, at the homestead that I grew up on, right? That's really
Yeah.
what I'm smelling and tasting.
And I think those kinds of notes are more interesting to me, right? Because they're transportive in nature. They're, at least for most consumers that are not super duper whiskey geeks, whether they've moaned through that thing or not before, they have mowed through something. Well, might
Sure.
likely have mowed through something, whether it be wild onions or whatever. And so they're
Mhm.
starting to understand that while they may not know what the wild mustard smelled like when it was getting mowed, they do know what the
Mhm.
lawnmower and what the fresh green cut. And so they can start identifying those things. It puts them in the same place. They're transported to where you were trying to take them. And I think that's a good and meaningful way to do things.
Yep.
So we haven't, man, we're pushing on the hour as it sits right now, and we
Yeah, I
haven't
don't know
talked
what your
about.
time scale is. I've got all the time in the world for you.
Yeah,
So,
I've got to go do some picking up of children very soon, right?
oh,
From
yeah, yeah,
our
yeah.
dance and
Mhm,
gymnastics. It's that time of the year. We're doing dance
mhm,
and gymnastics during the summer. Um, but so let's talk about where can we purchase all of the things that you guys have for sale, because there is, if I go to Hood River and I open up, there's a list of what looks like about 20, and I'm just
mhm.
eyeballing this, about 20 different
Yep.
possible things to select, and each one of those things takes you to a website that has multiple bottles on that as
Mhm,
well. So
mhm.
there's something for everyone obviously here.
Yes. Yeah.
What
No, the Hood River Distillers portfolio, we could kit out an entire craft cocktail bar, and there's maybe only a couple things that you'd have to buy outside of the products that we currently make. So we really there's two distilleries that we own, and then we have the
Mhm.
larger blending and bottling plant. Um, but we kind of make it all, and we want to make sure that no matter the price point, we're over delivering on quality, and no matter the product, that if we make it, it's going to be great. So yeah, absolutely, like you said, on the website it's available. We are working with Big Thirst, so you can buy it through our website or you can buy it through their website. And then also we have distribution across, I think, 47 different states and a handful of countries as well. So if you aren't sure where to find it near you, obviously the internet's very helpful. And since we were all used to the internet, searching there is a great idea. But
Mhm.
if you send a message to either my Instagram, which is at the Bartlemay, or any of the 3 brand Instagrams that I run, which is Clear Creek Distillery, McCarthy's Whiskey, or Trails End, I can help you track down bottles of those things near you. And then also you could send us an email at info@hrdspirits.com. But absolutely, we're currently, every month we list a few more things on the website. With Clear Creek Distillery, it's all fruit brandies. Everything's made from products or from raw materials that come from within 200 miles of the facility. Pear and apple brandies, blue plum brandy, cherry brandy. Douglas Fir brandy, which is if you're following the Instagram account, we actually did Doug Fir harvest on Monday and the week before. So that's a really fun item to get into. We also make the McCarthy's American Single Malt, which is the first American single malt. It's now available in 3 and 6 years old, and two sherry finishes, a PX finish and an Oloroso sherry finish. The Oloroso being the current highest rated American single malt in the history of the Whiskey Advocate. And that was actually Garrett's first blend of McCarthy's. That was the first time that he gave direction to where the whiskey was going to go. So we're terribly proud of him. And then outside of that, and the Clear Creek and McCarthy's, we also have Timberline vodka, which is made from 14 different varieties of Pacific Northwest apple and grain, distilled here by the team at Clear Creek. We're also the team that's doing the production for the Dale DeGroff Amaro and Aperitivo. So that launched this last year. It's been a lot of fun. And then we do some of the finishing and all of the experimentation on the finishes for the Trails End bourbon line. So the main core Trails Ends are the Trails End 8, which is finished in Oregon Oak staves, the Trails End 8 finished in apple brandy casks, and then the Trails End 10, which is finished in whole Oregon Oak casks. We have done a small limited time release of a porter barrel finish, and I've got maybe a few other tricks up my sleeve for future releases. I know I'm going to forget. We also have the Old Delicious, which is a double bourbon barrel apple brandy. Like you said, there are so many different liquids that we're responsible for here at the distillery. And we pull it off because the three of us are making a really amazing team. And Hood River Distillers is really great at what they do. And that's how we can bring all of this magic to your front door.
You said a whole lot. I mean, you've obviously worked on this, right? Because you said a whole lot in a very short amount of time. So I'm going to encourage anybody to hit the rewind button for, like 2 times, right? Because it's like 30 seconds at a bit. You're going to get more information in the last 60 seconds than you can possibly contain. But just kind of recapping this, there's McCarthy's, which is the oldest and one of the most storied American single malts. And as that kind of comes into fruition in a legal definition, hopefully very soon, and I say hopefully very soon, knowing full well that 2 years ago I sat in this exact chair and was talking about, we're about to have, they're about to pass the American single malt. It's going to be solidified. Here's what it is. It's a little early on that.
I will quote Steve Hawley here, who's the president of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. It's already a category, right? There's only like 170 distilleries in Scotland making whiskey. There's over 250 distilleries in the United States making American single malt, and just over 100 of them are members of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, right? We as we grow, as we educate the consumer, there are, you see a handful of small liquor stores that are opening or that have shelves that are labeled American Single Malt Whiskey. You're starting to see bars and restaurants have American Single Malt Whiskey selections within their menu. Every time a liquor store or a restaurant creates a new American single malt category on their menu or on their website or on their shelf, that's just further legitimizing the fact that this is a new category outside of whatever the TTB and their timeline might be. It's not like tomorrow we're all going to stop making American single malt, right?
Right.
The people that are making it are in love with it and celebrating it, and the people that are learning about it and consuming it are, to be honest, probably even more excited than the producers. I have now talked to 2 different bourbon media accounts. I won't call them out by name, but they're bourbon accounts that literally says bourbon in the name of what they're doing. And yet they're spending more and more time talking to American single malt producers, because even though they love bourbon, they're in love with American single malt and being a part of a burgeoning category and what that means. So
yeah, I think it's one of the places that's got some of the most interesting growth that's going to happen. And I think, at least, from my perspective, the only thought and concern, and I guess maybe this is a two-sided coin here, is luckily the segment is not big enough yet to have a whole bunch of people that want to rush it with what they call American single malt, since there is no legal definition. They could throw anything on it, right? Like they could just kind of push this out and be nefarious. So the market's not big enough to have anybody want to push in to do that yet.
Mhm.
But I think the rest of us, we want it to just be nailed down, so that way,
Oh yeah, no. I mean,
it,
we're proud commission members.
yeah,
We appreciate all of the thought that went into the rules as set forward by the commission and what that means as producers. In both, it protects the creativity, but also protects the category as well, while making sure that it's open enough to allow producers from all climates within the
mhm,
United States to be able to produce something that they're proud of, and also small and large producers alike to be able to get into it. Right, there's exceptions and considerations made for scalability. They didn't want to make it so expensive that nobody could get into it as a newcomer, and therefore isolate and disrupt the potential for creativity within the category. So I definitely, the rules as written by the commission are incredibly well thought out. We're on board with every single one of them because they really do make sense
mhm.
for what the producers of American single malt would like to see in the category.
Yeah, and I think the fans of it are just really hoping that they go ahead and just rubber stamp that definition as it sits and don't tweak it, right? Because you also
Yep.
never know if they're gonna, change something that either um, opens it too broadly or
Mhm.
closes in some edges that the commission had left open intentionally, exactly like what you're
Mhm.
talking about, that inhibits, growth or innovation. And so,
Mhm.
we're in this like Schrodinger's classification of
Yeah.
American single malt right now. We're both
Mhm.
defined and undefined, and
Yep.
until they hit the button and they say
Mhm.
we're done, then
Mhm.
anything could happen. It would be weird for them to change it,
Yep. It would be
but it's the
weird.
government, right? Who
Yeah.
knows what they're going to do on any
Mhm.
given day? Um, I'll be honest. At this point, I have touched none of the questions that are over here.
I'm so sorry.
And no, 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 no. This is good. This is exactly what I hoped for, right? Almost everything came off of my notepad because it came out of an organic conversation. But what it tells me is that we have to do this again
Yeah,
very
I
soon,
would love
right?
to do
Because
that.
we
Yep.
got through like a third of the content, and if I didn't have some prior concerns, I would absolutely be sitting here probably for another hour and a half,
Sure.
realistically. But I do appreciate the time you have given me. You
Yeah, of
can't make
course.
more of it. It's always really interesting when people are like, yeah, absolutely, I'll talk to this guy who sits in his room and talks at a wall by himself for a couple of hours. It's always really really fun conversation. And you know, we didn't get to talk about pancakes or crepes or waffles
Yeah,
or
I was
any
wondering if
of the other
this
things
was
that
gonna
were
come
on
up.
the list to talk about, right? Like there's a whole host of things, so we'll absolutely put some more time on the
Yeah.
calendar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I'm very excited at the opportunity to get to chat with you again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and like I said at the very beginning, you are an amazing interviewer. I'm one of your followers. I'm one of the people that watches what you put on YouTube. You do a really great job, and I appreciate the time and the space that you've given me to not only talk about the brands that I'm so in love with, but also some silly things that make the job worthwhile. So
It's the stories that make it all interesting, because at the end of the day, we're all we're chasing products, but the products have a story and they have people affiliated with it, and those are the things that make it take it to the next level. Because most of the people that are listening to this aren't the average consumer that walk in, they look up, they grab something, they walk off, right? And everybody
mhm.
that shows up here is wanting a little more of a story. And honestly, interviews with people like you are super easy, because I ask one question and then you got it, right? Like this is you think I'm doing well. I'm just trying to find the question that I need to ask the person to let them tell their story, because that's all it
Sure.
is. Thanks for tuning into this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod to give me a follow, and you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found on my website at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, and contact details. Thanks for stopping by.